The crystal chandeliers of Marcello's cast diamond-bright reflections across Chicago's most exclusive dining room, where power brokers and old money gathered beneath vaulted ceilings that had witnessed a century of the city's secrets. White tablecloths stretched like fresh snow across tables, positioned with deliberate precision, each placement a careful calculation of status and influence. In the corner booth, partially obscured by an ornamental marble column, sat Dominic Rossi. His presence didn't announce itself with volume or movement, but rather with the quiet weight of absolute authority. At 38, he had transformed his family's street-level operations into a sophisticated empire that touched everything from legitimate real estate developments to the shadowy networks that truly ran Chicago. His charcoal suit was Italian, his watch Swiss, his expression unreadable as pale winter light filtered through floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the frozen Chicago River. Beside him sat a boy of 8 with dark curls that fell across his forehead and eyes the color of storm clouds. Marco Rossi sat with peculiar stillness, his small hands folded precisely in his lap, his gaze fixed on the white tablecloth before him. Servers moved around their table with practiced efficiency, but none addressed the child directly. They had learned, through uncomfortable experience, that the boy never responded to spoken questions. His silence had become an accepted oddity in his father's world, interpreted as shyness by some, peculiarity by others, and weakness by those foolish enough to say so within Dominic's hearing. If you're enjoying this story so far, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe. Drop a comment telling me where in the world you're watching from. I love hearing from you. Elena Moretti wiped steam from her brow as she balanced 4 plates of osso buco up her left arm, the weight familiar after 3 years of double shifts at Marcello's. Her white server's apron bore the creases of a 14-hour day, and her sensible black shoes had logged enough miles to cross several states. The textbook in her locker, Advanced Psychology, her junior year at community college, felt like it belonged to someone else's life, someone who didn't spend every waking hour trying to keep the lights on in a studio apartment on the South Side. The restaurant manager, Vincent, materialized at her elbow with the particular expression that meant trouble. His cologne was too strong, his tie too tight, and his hands trembled slightly as he gripped his tablet. "Elena," he said, his voice dropping to an urgent whisper, "I need you to take the Rossi table." Every server within earshot stiffened. Jennifer, who had 10 years of experience and an apartment in Lincoln Park, suddenly became very interested in polishing already spotless wine glasses. Marcus, who usually fought for high-profile tables, developed an immediate need to check inventory in the kitchen. "The corner booth?" Elena asked, though she already knew. There was only one Rossi table. "Dominic Rossi," Vincent confirmed, pronouncing the name like an incantation that might summon disaster. And his son, the last server who brought them the wrong wine pairing, found herself blacklisted from every decent restaurant in Chicago within 48 hours. He straightened his tie compulsively. "You're new enough that if something goes wrong, I can claim it was a training issue. Corporate will understand." Elena's jaw tightened, but she nodded. She needed this job. Her younger brother's tuition at the school for the deaf didn't pay itself, and the medical bills from her mother's accident 2 years ago still arrived with depressing regularity. She couldn't afford principles, only survival. As she approached the corner booth, Elena noticed how the ambient noise of the restaurant seemed to dim, as if the air itself grew heavier near Dominic Rossi. Other diners shifted in their seats, unconsciously angling away from his table while stealing glances when they thought he wasn't watching. He was watching everything. Dominic barely acknowledged her arrival, his attention fixed on his phone as he conducted what sounded like a business negotiation in Italian. His voice was quiet, controlled, but carried an undercurrent of absolute certainty that his instructions would be followed. Beside him, the boy, Marco, she remembered from the whispered briefing, sat perfectly motionless, his eyes tracking the movement of other diners with an intensity that seemed too old for his young face. Elena set down her tray and pulled out her order pad, preparing to recite the evening's specials. But something made her pause. The way Marco's shoulders hunched slightly inward, the way his fingers twisted together in his lap, a small gesture of distress hidden below the table's edge. The way his eyes followed her lips when she'd greeted the table, not with the casual attention of a child, but with the focused desperation of someone trying to understand. She recognized that look. She'd seen it every day for 5 years. Her younger brother, Luca, had been born deaf. Their mother had learned sign language while Elena was still in high school, and Elena had absorbed it alongside her regular studies, practicing with Luca every evening until the fluid movement of hands became as natural as speech. After their mother's accident left her with limited mobility, Elena had become Luca's primary interpreter, his bridge to a world that rarely bothered to meet him halfway. Marco wasn't deaf. She could see the subtle way he reacted to sounds, the slight turn of his head when a glass shattered across the room. But there was something about his silence, his watchfulness, that felt achingly familiar. Without conscious decision, Elena's hands moved. She set down her pad and signed with practiced fluidity. "Hello, my name is Elena. What's your name?" The transformation in Marco was instantaneous, profound. His head snapped up, his eyes widening with shock that quickly melted into something like desperate hope. His hands flew from his lap, moving with eager, slightly clumsy signs that poured out in a rush. "You can see me? You understand?" Dominic's phone call ended abruptly. The dangerous man's attention shifted from his business dealings to the waitress who had just shattered an invisible barrier around his son. The temperature at the table seemed to drop several degrees. As his pale eyes assessed Elena with the same focused intensity he likely applied to potential threats or valuable assets. "You know sign language," he stated, his voice carrying quiet menace wrapped in cultured tones. It wasn't a question, but an observation that demanded explanation. His fingers, she noticed, had gone still on the table, a deliberate cessation of movement that his associates would recognize as the moment before either generosity or violence. Elena maintained eye contact despite every instinct screaming at her to look away from those predators' eyes. "Yes, sir. My younger brother is deaf. I've been signing since I was 13. Marco's hands moved again, rapid and insistent as he signed to his father with an animation that transformed his entire bearing. The statue-still child had become vibrantly alive, his expression open and pleading as he clearly advocated for something. Dominic watched his son's hands with an expression that might have been pain, quickly masked by his usual control. When he responded, his own signs were hesitant, limited, clearly self-taught and unpracticed. The gap between father and son had never been more apparent than in this moment of attempted communication. "My son," Dominic said carefully, his gaze returning to Elena, "hasn't spoken since he was 4 years old. Not a single word in 4 years. Something flickered behind his carefully maintained mask. Vulnerability, perhaps, or old guilt. "The doctors say there's no physical reason, no damage to his vocal cords, no neurological explanation. He simply stopped." "He can hear perfectly," Dominic continued, his tone measured, but his eyes never leaving her face. "But he won't speak. The only way he communicates is through signs he's been teaching himself from videos and books." His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "And I've been too proud, too stupid to learn his language properly." Marco tugged at Elena's sleeve, his small hand insistent as he signed with desperate enthusiasm. "Nobody else understands me here. They talk around me like I'm invisible, like I'm stupid because I don't use their words." Elena knew that feeling intimately from watching Luca navigate a world designed for hearing people. "He's not invisible," Elena said firmly, signing simultaneously so Marco could follow. And silence doesn't mean there's nothing to say. Sometimes the people who speak the least have the most important things to communicate. Dominic's expression shifted almost imperceptibly, calculation replacing initial wariness. He signaled to Vincent, who materialized instantly with the eager desperation of someone hoping to avoid disaster. My son would like this server to handle our table for the remainder of the evening, Dominic stated, his tone making it clear this wasn't a request. Please adjust your schedules accordingly. Vincent nodded so vigorously Elena worried about whiplash. Of course, Mr. Rossi, whatever you need. Elena will provide excellent service, I assure you. As Vincent retreated, nearly tripping over his own feet in his haste, Elena knelt beside Marco's chair so they could communicate at eye level. She ignored the sharp intake of breath from a nearby server who clearly thought such familiarity was dangerously inappropriate. Would you like to tell me what you'd like for dinner? She signed, her expression warm and patient. Marco's response was enthusiastic, but heartbreaking. I usually get whatever they bring me. Nobody asks what I want. Well, I'm asking, Elena signed back. What sounds good to you tonight? For the next 10 minutes, Elena and Marco engaged in a conversation that flowed with the natural ease of two people who shared a language. He asked about her day, told her about a book he'd been reading, demonstrated a new sign he'd learned, and carefully selected his meal with the focused deliberation of someone unaccustomed to being given choices. Throughout this exchange, Dominic Rossi watched with an intensity that made Elena hyper-aware of every movement. His business, whatever dark dealings occupied his attention, had been completely set aside. His phone lay silent on the table. His associates, visible at nearby tables, waited with visible impatience for his attention. But Dominic's focus remained fixed on his son's animated face, watching the transformation that simple communication had created. When Elena finally stood to place their order, Dominic's hand shot out, gripping her wrist with surprising gentleness given the obvious strength in those scarred fingers. How much does Marcello's pay you? He asked bluntly. Elena's heart rate spiked. Sir, I don't think that's... Answer the question. Not threatening, just absolute certainty that his questions would be answered. $12 an hour, plus tips, she admitted, her voice steadier than she felt. Dominic pulled a business card from his jacket, writing something on the back, before sliding it across the pristine tablecloth. Tomorrow evening, 6 o'clock, my home in Lincoln Park, the address is on the back. Elena stared at the card, her mind racing through possibilities that ranged from opportunity to danger. Mr. Rossi, I appreciate the interest, but I have classes and my job here. The amount on that card is what I'm offering weekly, he interrupted, his tone making it clear the discussion was concluded. For teaching my son, 2 hours every evening, 6 days a week. You'll have Sundays off. His pale eyes held hers with uncomfortable directness. Marco needs someone who doesn't just understand sign language. He needs someone who understands what it means to be invisible in plain sight. Elena turned the card over. The number written there in precise handwriting was more than she made in a month at Marcello's. I can't just abandon my responsibilities, she began, but Marco's hand on her arm stopped her. The boy's signs were simple but devastating. Please. You're the first person who's really talked to me in so long. Please don't disappear. Looking into his eyes, seeing the loneliness she recognized from every time Luca came home from school reporting how the other kids had talked over him, around him, but never to him, Elena felt her careful boundaries crumbling. I'll need to arrange coverage for my shifts here, she said carefully, addressing Dominic while signing for Marco. And I can't miss my Tuesday and Thursday classes. They're required for my degree. Done, Dominic replied immediately. I'll handle Marcello's management. Your position here will remain available should you need it. And Tuesdays and Thursdays will schedule around your classes. He paused, something almost vulnerable crossing his features. My son has been living in silence in a house full of people for 4 years. If you can give him his voice back, whatever you need, it's yours. The evening progressed with a surreal quality that left Elena feeling unmoored from her normal reality. She served the Rossi table with meticulous care, but more importantly, she conversed with Marco in the fluid language of signs that transformed him from the quiet, overlooked child into an animated, brilliant 8-year-old. He told her about the astronomy book he was reading, his hands painting pictures of distant galaxies and stellar formations with the passionate precision of someone who spent long nights studying the cosmos from his bedroom window. He explained his theory that black holes weren't endings but doorways to other dimensions, his logic surprisingly sophisticated for his age. He described his frustration with tutors who spoke at him rather than to him, who tested his intelligence with simplistic exercises that insulted his actual capabilities. His signs grew sharp and angry when he recounted how one teacher had suggested he might be developmentally delayed because he wouldn't respond to verbal questions. "I'm not delayed," he signed with fierce pride. "I just choose my language carefully. Words failed me once. I won't trust them again." The cryptic reference to trauma hung between them, but Elena didn't press. Trust had to be earned, not demanded. Dominic observed these exchanges with an expression that cycled between wonder, pain, and something that looked like self-recrimination. Several times, his own hands began to form signs, hesitant and uncertain, before dropping back to the table, as if he'd thought better of attempting communication he might bungle. When Marco excused himself to use the restroom, escorted by a discreet bodyguard Elena hadn't even noticed until the man materialized from the shadows, Dominic leaned forward, his voice dropping to a register meant only for her ears. "4 years ago, my wife was killed in a territorial dispute. Marco was with her. He watched it happen." His jaw clenched, the scar along his knuckles whitening with tension. "He spoke at her funeral, said goodbye, Mama, and then never spoke again." His pale eyes held ghosts she couldn't begin to comprehend. "Every specialist in Chicago has examined him. Therapists, psychiatrists, speech pathologists. They all say the same thing. There's nothing physically wrong. He's chosen silence as protection, and I don't know how to reach him." "You're reaching him now," Elena observed quietly, nodding toward Marco's empty seat. "By being here, by caring enough to find him help." "Am I?" Dominic's laugh held no humor. "Or am I throwing money at a problem I created, hoping someone else can fix what I broke?" Before Elena could respond, Marco returned, sliding back into the booth with the fluid grace of a child comfortable in his body, despite his silence. His hands moved immediately. "Were you talking about me?" "Yes," Dominic signed back clumsily, his fingers forming the letters with visible effort. "About how proud I am of you." The simple admission, communicated through halting signs that revealed how hard Dominic was trying, brought moisture to Marco's eyes that he quickly blinked away. The boy reached across the table, his small hand covering his father's scarred one, in a gesture of wordless forgiveness that needed no translation. The evening concluded with Dominic settling his bill in cash, an obscene tip that would have covered Elena's rent, and Marco extracting a promise that she would definitely, absolutely, without question appear at their home the following evening. "I've been practicing new signs," he told her enthusiastically as they prepared to leave. "I want to show you everything I've learned. And I want to hear about your brother. Does he like space too? Does he ever feel invisible?" "Sometimes," Elena admitted, signing honestly. "But then he reminds me that invisible doesn't mean powerless. Sometimes being overlooked means people underestimate you, and that can be its own advantage." Marco's smile was conspiratorial, wise beyond his years. "That's what I think too." As the Rossi entourage departed, Dominic's hand protective on his son's shoulder, bodyguards materializing from the shadows to form a discreet perimeter, Elena stood in the restaurant's entrance, watching them disappear into a sleek black SUV with tinted windows. Vincent appeared at her elbow, his expression cycling between awe and terror. "Do you have any idea what you just did?" he hissed. Dominic Rossi doesn't let anyone close to his son. The last person who tried to take a photo of Marco had their camera smashed and found themselves explaining their invasion of privacy to some very unfriendly people in a parking garage. "I didn't try to get close," Elena replied, still processing the evening's surreal turn. "I just talked to him." In sign language, to the son of Chicago's most dangerous man. The son nobody is supposed to acknowledge exists. Vincent's hands shook as he straightened his already straight tie. "You've either just secured the best opportunity of your life or signed your death warrant, possibly both." Elena looked down at the business card in her palm, at the address in Lincoln Park where Chicago's wealthiest and most powerful maintained their private fortresses. The amount Dominic had written still seemed impossible, the kind of money that could change everything, pay off her mother's medical bills, cover Luca's tuition, maybe even let her attend school full-time instead of cobbling together credits between shifts. But beneath the practical considerations, something else stirred. The memory of Marco's face transforming from lonely resignation to vibrant animation. The way his hands had flown through signs with the pent-up need of someone who'd been silent too long. Not by choice, but by circumstances that had stolen his trust in spoken words. She thought of Luca, and how many times she'd watched strangers look right through him because they couldn't be bothered to learn how he communicated. How many opportunities he'd been denied because people equated silence with stupidity, different with less than. Whatever Dominic Rossi was, whatever dark dealings comprised his empire, he was also a father desperate to reach a son locked in trauma-induced silence. And Marco was a brilliant, lonely child who deserved to be seen. Elena tucked the business card into her apron pocket, decision crystallizing with the weight of inevitability. "I guess we'll find out which one it is tomorrow at 6. The Lincoln Park mansion rose from its corner lot like something transplanted from a European city. All limestone and wrought iron, with tall windows that glowed golden against the winter twilight. Elena stood on the sidewalk, her worn coat insufficient against the February wind that whipped off Lake Michigan, comparing the elegant facade to the address on Dominic's card. A black iron fence enclosed the property, topped with decorative spikes that were probably more functional than ornamental. Security cameras tracked her approach with mechanical precision. Before she could reach for the intercom, the gate swung open with silent efficiency. A man in a dark suit emerged from the guardhouse, tall, broad-shouldered, with the watchful eyes of someone trained to assess threats. His hand rested casually near his jacket, where Elena suspected a weapon was holstered. "Miss Moretti?" His voice was polite but carried the flat affect of someone conducting a security protocol. "Mr. Rossi is expecting you. I'll need to see identification and check your bag." Elena handed over her driver's license and the backpack containing teaching materials she'd hastily assembled, flashcards, children's books, her own worn ASL dictionary. The guard examined everything with methodical thoroughness, even flipping through her notebooks to check for hidden compartments. "Clean," he announced into a radio before returning her belongings. "Follow the path to the main entrance. Mrs. Chen will meet you there." The front door opened before Elena could knock, revealing a petite woman in her 60s with silver-streaked hair pulled into an elegant bun. Her expression was warm but assessing, taking in Elena's second-hand coat and scuffed boots with a single comprehensive glance. "I'm Helen Chen, the household manager," she said, with a slight accent that suggested childhood in Hong Kong. "Mr. Rossi has instructed me to provide whatever you need. Marco has been watching for you since 4 o'clock. Her smile softened the formality. "He's very excited." The interior was exactly what Elena expected and nothing like she'd imagined. Yes, there was wealth, marble floors, crystal chandeliers, artwork that probably cost more than her entire year's salary. But there was also warmth. Photos lined the hallways, most featuring Marco at various ages, some including a beautiful woman with kind eyes who must have been his mother. Children's drawings hung in expensive frames alongside the serious artwork. A telescope stood by a window overlooking the garden. Books were stacked on every available surface: astronomy texts, novels, scientific journals, creating comfortable clutter that contradicted the mansion's formal elegance. Marco's classroom is on the second floor, Mrs. Chen explained, leading Elena up a curved staircase with an iron banister. Mr. Rossi had it prepared this afternoon. He's quite thorough when he decides something matters. The classroom proved this assessment. What had probably been a formal sitting room now contained a child-sized desk and chair, built-in bookshelves already stocked with sign language resources, and educational posters showing ASL alphabet charts and common phrases. A whiteboard dominated one wall. Comfortable seating filled the corners: bean bags, a window seat with cushions, places designed for a child who might need space to think or decompress. Marco sat in the window seat, his face pressed against the glass as he watched the driveway. When he spotted Elena, his entire body seemed to light up from within. He launched himself from the cushions and rushed toward her with the unself-conscious enthusiasm of a child who'd forgotten to guard his heart. His signs came in a rush. "You came! I thought maybe you wouldn't. I thought maybe last night was a dream and I'd wake up and still be invisible. But you're real, and you're here, and I have so much to show you." Elena knelt to his level, signing back with matching enthusiasm. "Of course I came. I made you a promise, didn't I? And I always keep my promises." "Most people don't," Marco signed, his expression briefly shadowed before brightening again. "But I think you're different." Dominic appeared in the doorway, still wearing a suit, though he'd removed his jacket and loosened his tie. The concession to casual made him somehow more intimidating, not less, the dangerous man at ease in his territory. "Thank you for coming," he said simply, his eyes moving between Elena and his son's animated face. "I wasn't certain you would." "I keep my commitments, Mr. Rossi." "Dominic," he corrected. "If you're going to be part of Marco's life, formality seems unnecessary." He moved into the room, his attention fixing on the teaching materials Elena had spread across the desk. "Mrs. Chen will bring dinner at 7. You'll eat with us," Marco insists. A ghost of a smile. "He's been planning the menu since breakfast." Marco tugged at Elena's sleeve, pulling her toward the bookshelves where he'd organized his collection with meticulous care. Astronomy texts grouped by topic, fiction arranged alphabetically, and on one special shelf, every sign language resource he'd been able to find: books, printed charts, even transcripts from online videos he'd studied frame by frame. "I taught myself," he signed with obvious pride. "Nobody would learn for me, so I learned for myself. But I make mistakes sometimes because I don't have anyone to practice with, to tell me when I'm signing wrong." Elena's chest ached at the lonely determination this represented. A child spending years teaching himself a language in isolation, with no one to confirm his understanding or celebrate his progress. "Well, now you have me," she signed, "and I promise we'll practice together. You can show me what you've learned and I'll help you refine it. But Marco?" She waited until his eyes met hers. "Even your mistakes are brave. Do you understand? Every sign you learned alone, every effort you made without help. That took courage most people never have to find." Marco's eyes filled with tears as he tried to blink away. His hands trembled slightly as he signed. "I thought maybe I was being stubborn. Stupid. That's what my old tutor said. That if I just tried harder to use words like normal people, everything would be easier." "Your old tutor was wrong," Elena stated firmly, making sure Dominic could see her signs too. "There's no such thing as normal communication. There's only what works for each person. And you found what works for you. That's not stubborn. That's brilliant." Dominic's expression was difficult to read, but Elena caught the slight tightening around his eyes, the way his scarred hands flexed at his sides. He was a man accustomed to control, to fixing problems through money or force. But this problem, his son's trauma-locked silence, couldn't be solved with the tools that had built his empire. I should leave you to your lesson, Dominic said, though he made no move toward the door. His gaze lingered on Marco's animated face, drinking in the transformation that simple understanding had created. Actually, Elena signed and spoke simultaneously, I was hoping you might join us, at least for the first session. Dominic's surprise was evident. I thought, Marco needs to communicate with you, not just with me, Elena interrupted gently. You're his father. You're the most important person in his world. If you can't understand him, if he can't truly talk to you, then we're just putting another barrier between you instead of building bridges. Marco's hands moved hesitantly. Dad's very busy. Important. He doesn't have time to— I have time, Dominic cut in, his voice rough with emotion he quickly controlled. His signs were clumsy as he added, always time for you. The next hour revealed the painful gap between father and son. Dominic's self-taught signing was limited to basic needs: hungry, tired, school, home. He could ask simple questions but couldn't follow when Marco's hands flew through complex thoughts about black holes and quantum physics, about the loneliness of being invisible, about dreams that couldn't be contained in elementary vocabulary. Elena watched the frustration build in both of them. Marco simplifies his thoughts to match his father's limited understanding, losing nuance and depth in the translation. Dominic struggles to form signs, his powerful hands, so certain in violence and negotiation, fumbling through this foreign language. Stop, Elena finally said, signing the word sharply to get their attention. This isn't working because you're both trying too hard to be perfect. Communication isn't about perfection. It's about connection. She turned to Dominic. You're afraid of making mistakes in front of your son. Afraid that fumbling through signs makes you look weak. His expression confirmed the assessment, even as he started to deny it. And you, she signed to Marco, are so grateful that your father is trying that you're hiding your real thoughts, making yourself smaller so he doesn't feel bad about his limitations. Marco's eyes widened with surprise at being so accurately read. Here's what we're going to do, Elena continued. We're going to practice failing. Dominic, you're going to sign something complicated, something you'll absolutely mess up. And Marco, you're going to correct him without making it easier. You're going to demand that he understand your real thoughts, not the simplified version. I don't understand, Dominic said carefully. Trust is built through imperfection, Elena explained. When you make mistakes and Marco corrects you with patience, he learns that he can be honest without hurting you. When he expresses complex thoughts and you struggle but keep trying, he learns that his ideas matter enough for you to fight through the difficulty. She pulled 2 chairs close together. Dominic, tell Marco about your day. Use whatever signs you know, and when you don't know a sign, spell it or make something up. Marco, you help him, but don't simplify what you want to say back. Push him, make him work for it. If you're hooked on this story, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss an upload. Your support means everything and helps me bring you more emotional stories like this one. What followed was messy, frustrating, and absolutely beautiful. Dominic described a business meeting, his signs halting and often incorrect. Marco corrected him with increasing confidence, demonstrating proper hand shapes and movements. When Dominic didn't know how to sign negotiation, he spelled it out letter by letter, his jaw tight with determination. Marco responded by telling his father about the book he was reading, a complex explanation of gravitational time dilation that required signs Dominic didn't know. But instead of giving up, he asked Marco to teach him. Slowly, painfully, father and son built a vocabulary between them. That's enough for today, Elena finally called, noting the fatigue in both their faces. You did well, both of you. It doesn't feel like we did well, Dominic admitted, his voice carrying rare uncertainty. It feels like I learned 5 words and forgot 10. That's how language learning works, Elena assured him, especially when you're learning under pressure. But you showed up, you tried. You didn't give up when it got hard. That's what Marco needed to see. Marco's signs were soft, almost shy. I liked it, practicing with Dad, even when he got things wrong. His small face turned toward his father. Will you practice again tomorrow? Every day, Dominic promised, his clumsy signs made sincere by the fierce determination in his eyes. Until I can understand everything you want to tell me. Mrs. Chen appeared at precisely 7 o'clock, announcing that dinner was served. Elena started to gather her materials, assuming her session had concluded, but Marco's hand on her arm stopped her. You have to stay for dinner, he signed urgently. I told Mrs. Chen to make your favorite. Well, I guessed your favorite. Do you like chicken parmesan? Please say yes because that's what I told her to make. Elena glanced at Dominic, who shrugged with surprising ease. It seems my son has decided you're eating with us. I learned years ago not to argue with his decisions. He's more stubborn than I am. The dining room was less formal than Elena expected. Yes, the table could seat 20, but tonight it was set for 3 at one end, creating intimacy despite the room's grandeur. Crystal and china, yes, but also Marco's drawings taped to one wall and a half-finished puzzle spread across a sideboard. Dinner conversation, if it could be called that, flowed in 3 languages, Dominic speaking and signing simultaneously with his limited vocabulary, Elena smoothly interpreting and expanding, Marco's hands flying through descriptions of his day with the freedom of someone finally, truly heard. The new tutor came today, Marco signed, his expression souring. She lasted 40 minutes before she complained to Mrs. Chen that I was being deliberately difficult by refusing to speak. Dominic's fork paused halfway to his mouth. Mrs. Chen didn't mention. Because I asked her not to tell you, Marco interrupted, his signs sharp. I didn't want another person fired. It's not their fault they don't understand. It is absolutely their fault, Dominic countered, his voice hardening. They're paid to educate you, not to demand you conform to their limitations. Elena intervened gently. What if we approach this differently? Instead of firing tutors who can't communicate with Marco, what if we required all household staff and educators to learn basic sign language as a condition of employment? Both Rossi males turned to stare at her. Make it part of the job requirement, she continued. Anyone who works in this house regularly needs to learn at least conversational ASL, not fluent, but functional. Enough that Marco never feels invisible in his own home. That's... Dominic paused, considering. That's actually brilliant. Why didn't I think of that? Because you were focused on protecting Marco from people who wouldn't understand, instead of changing the environment to include him, Elena explained. It's a different approach, not isolation for safety, but adaptation for belonging. Marco's eyes had gone wide. You mean everyone would have to learn to talk to me? On my terms? Why not? Elena signed. It's your home. You shouldn't have to be a guest in your own life. The look that passed between father and son carried weight Elena couldn't fully interpret. Years of accommodation, of Marco making himself smaller to fit a world built for speaking people. And now, suddenly, the possibility that the world might bend to include him instead. I'll have Mrs. Chen compile a list of all regular staff, Dominic decided. We'll hire an instructor to conduct mandatory classes. Anyone who refuses or fails to make a genuine effort will be replaced. His expression was the same one he probably wore in business negotiations. My son will not be made to feel like an inconvenience in his own home. Marco's signs were small, vulnerable. What if they hate me for making them learn? Elena's heart cracked at the question. How many times had this child been made to feel that his needs were burdens? That accommodation was an imposition rather than basic human decency? Then they don't belong in your life, she signed firmly. The people worth having around you are the ones who see learning your language as a privilege, not a punishment. After dinner, Dominic excused himself to make phone calls, already implementing the new policy, Elena suspected. Marco led her to his bedroom, eager to show her his private sanctuary. The room reflected a brilliant, lonely mind. Star charts covered the ceiling, constellations picked out in glow-in-the-dark paint. Bookshelves overflowed with texts on physics, astronomy, mathematics, subjects far beyond typical 8-year-old fare. A telescope stood by the window, pointed toward the evening sky. But it was the walls that broke Elena's heart. Every inch was covered with drawings, notes, observations, a visual diary of a child trying to make sense of a world that wouldn't speak his language. Sketches of people's faces with annotations. This expression means angry, but they say they're fine. This smile doesn't reach the eyes, lying. This gesture means they want to leave but are too polite to say so. I study people, Marco signed, catching her examination of his work. Since I can't understand everything they say, I have to watch what they do, what they really mean, versus what their words claim. You've made yourself into a profiler, Elena observed, using the sign for someone who analyzes behavior. That's incredibly sophisticated for your age. Is it weird? Marco asked, vulnerability creeping into his signs. It's extraordinary, Elena corrected. You've developed skills most adults never learn. You see what people hide. That's a gift, Marco. He showed her his journals, meticulous observations of everyone in his life. His father tells when he was worried but pretending otherwise. Mrs. Chen's subtle stress signals before she got a headache. The security guard who was sad about something but never talked about it. You care about them, Elena noted. These aren't just observations. You're tracking their well-being. Nobody tracks mine, Marco signed matter-of-factly. So I track theirs. If I can see when they're upset, maybe I can help, even if they don't notice me helping. The loneliness in that statement was devastating. A child so accustomed to being overlooked that he'd made himself into a silent guardian, caring for people who barely acknowledged his existence. Marco, Elena signed carefully. I see you. Not just your silence or your signs. I see how brilliant you are, how kind, how much you notice and care about others, and I promise you, you're not invisible to me. Tears spilled down Marco's cheeks, the kind of release that comes from years of holding everything in. Elena pulled him into a hug, letting him cry against her shoulder while his small body shook with suppressed sobs. She didn't tell him it was okay. It wasn't okay that an 8-year-old had been forced into invisibility by a world too lazy to learn his language. It wasn't okay that he'd spent 4 years protecting everyone else's comfort while his own needs went unmet. When the storm passed, Marco pulled back and signed with watery determination. Thank you for seeing me. Always, Elena promised. Over the next 2 weeks, Elena's life transformed in ways she was still processing. Her shifts at Marcello's had been covered. Dominic had apparently purchased the restaurant outright, then donated it to a nonprofit with the stipulation that Elena remained on the payroll with full benefits, whether she worked shifts or not. Vincent had nearly fainted when the news was delivered. Her mother's medical bills had mysteriously vanished, paid off by an anonymous benefactor that Elena knew was anything but anonymous. When she'd confronted Dominic about it, he'd simply stated, "You can't focus on teaching Marco if you're worried about debt collectors. Consider it an investment in my son's education." Luca's tuition for the next 3 years had been similarly handled, with a generous donation to his school that happened to specify his continued enrollment, regardless of financial circumstances. Elena should have felt grateful. She did feel grateful. But she also felt manipulated, bought, her autonomy traded for financial security she desperately needed but hadn't asked for in this way. He does this, Mrs. Chen explained when Elena voiced her concerns. Mr. Rossi doesn't know how to show care except through solving problems. Money is his language. You've given him something he couldn't buy, connection with his son. He's trying to reciprocate in the only way he knows. Still, the arrangement sat uncomfortably. Elena was accustomed to earning her way, not being given things. The weight of obligation pressed down with increasing heaviness, even as her affection for Marco grew daily. The boy was thriving. His twice-daily lessons had expanded to include other subjects, Elena helping him with advanced mathematics that his regular tutors struggled to explain through signs, discussing physics concepts he'd been teaching himself from books, even working on creative writing exercises where Marco's internal world poured out through typed words that flowed more easily than speech ever had. True to his word, Dominic had implemented mandatory sign language training for all household staff. Mrs. Chen took to it with impressive dedication, practicing while she worked until she could hold basic conversations with Marco. The security team was more resistant, but one pointed conversation with Dominic about adapt or seek employment elsewhere had motivated rapid learning. Most remarkably, Dominic himself showed up for every evening lesson without fail. No matter what business crisis demanded attention, no matter what meetings ran late, he appeared at 6 o'clock sharp to practice with his son. His progress was slower than Marco's quick mind would have preferred, but the effort was sincere. He carried flashcards in his suit pockets, practicing signs during car rides. He watched ASL videos during lunch breaks. He made mistakes constantly and without shame, his pride apparently less important than communication with his son. Elena watched their relationship shift week by week. Marco grew bolder in expressing complex thoughts, no longer simplifying for his father's comfort. Dominic pushes through frustration to understand, asking questions, building vocabulary through sheer, stubborn determination. One evening, 3 weeks into their arrangement, Elena arrived to find the house in subtle chaos. Extra security personnel patrolled the perimeter. Mrs. Chen's usual warmth was strained. Even Marco seemed tense, his signs shorter and more cautious than usual. "Is everything all right?" Elena asked Dominic when he appeared, noting the hard set of his jaw. "Business complications," he replied tersely. "Nothing that affects you or Marco directly, but I need to handle some matters tonight. Can you stay with him? Keep him occupied until I return?" The request itself was ordinary. The weight behind it was anything but. "Of course," Elena agreed. "How long will you be gone?" "Hopefully just a few hours." Dominic's pale eyes held shadows she didn't want to interpret. He turned to Marco, signing with more fluidity than he'd possessed weeks ago. "Be good for Elena. I'll be back before bedtime." Marco's response was immediate and worried. "Is someone trying to hurt us?" The directness of the question shocked Elena, but Dominic answered with equal honesty. "Someone is making problems for our family. I'm going to solve them. That's what I do. I keep you safe." After Dominic left with half his security detail, Elena tried to maintain normalcy. They worked through Marco's astronomy homework, built a model of the solar system using craft supplies Mrs. Chen provided, and played chess, a game where Marco's strategic mind gave him advantage despite Elena's extra years. But Marco's attention kept drifting to the windows, watching the darkness beyond the estate's lights. "Are you scared?" Elena signed gently. Marco's hands stilled on a chess piece. "I'm always a little scared," he admitted. "Not of strangers or danger. I'm scared that one day Dad won't come back, like Mom didn't come back." The raw honesty gutted her. "Your dad is very capable," Elena signed carefully, "and very careful. He has people protecting him." "Mom had people protecting her too," Marco countered, his 8-year-old logic cutting through adult reassurances. "But sometimes bad things happen anyway, and if something happens to Dad, then I'm alone. Really alone." Elena pulled him close, her heart aching for this brilliant, traumatized child who'd already lost so much. "You're not alone, Marco. You have Mrs. Chen, the staff who care about you. You have your tutors and—" "I have you?" Marco interrupted, his signs almost desperate. "Even if something happens to Dad, you wouldn't leave me alone?" The weight of that question pressed down like physical force. What was she promising? How deep had she already waded into this dangerous world? "I won't abandon you," Elena signed, knowing even as she made the promise that she was binding herself to something far larger than a tutoring job. Whatever happens, you're not invisible to me. Dominic returned at midnight, his suit jacket missing and his shirt stained with something that might have been wine or might have been blood. Elena had stayed long past her usual hours, unwilling to leave Marco alone with his fears despite Mrs. Chen's gentle assurances that she would watch over the boy. Marco had finally fallen asleep on the library sofa, his hand still gripping Elena's, as if afraid she might disappear if he let go. Dominic stood in the doorway, taking in the scene with an expression Elena couldn't quite read. He was worried, she signed quietly, careful not to wake the sleeping child. Scared something would happen to you. He's right to be scared, Dominic replied, his own signs rough but comprehensible. My world is dangerous. Every day I go out that door, there's a chance I won't come back. He moved closer, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. That's why what you're doing matters so much. If something happens to me, Marco needs skills to survive without me. He needs to be able to communicate, to advocate for himself, to not be vulnerable because of his silence. Dominic, Elena began, but he cut her off. I know what I am, he stated flatly. I know the things I've done to build what I have. I'm not looking for redemption or forgiveness, but my son, his voice caught slightly. Marco deserves better than what I can give him. He deserves to be seen, heard, understood. And somehow you've given him that in a few weeks when I couldn't manage it in 4 years. The vulnerability in his admission was startling from a man who typically radiated control. Elena saw past the dangerous exterior to the father terrified of failing his child, of leaving him alone and unprepared for a cruel world. Then let me do more, Elena heard herself saying. Not just language lessons. Let me help him build connections beyond this house. Let me introduce him to my brother's community. Other kids who communicate differently, who won't make him feel strange for his silence. Dominic's expression shifted to something calculating. You'd bring him into your personal life? Risk your family's association with mine? Luca needs friends too, Elena pointed out. And Marco needs to know he's not the only kid who experiences the world differently. They could help each other. That's either very brave or very foolish, Dominic observed. Maybe both, Elena admitted. But it's what Marco needs. And I promised him he wouldn't be invisible anymore. That means giving him a life beyond these walls. The dangerous man and the struggling waitress regarded each other across the sleeping child between them, an unlikely alliance forming around a shared purpose, protecting the brilliant, broken boy who'd been failed by words and found refuge in silence. All right, Dominic finally agreed. We'll try it your way, carefully, with security. Of course with security, Elena sighed. I'm learning that's just part of your world. Welcome to my world then, Dominic said, a ghost of dark humor in his voice. I promise it's more complicated than you're ready for. He had no idea how right he was. The warehouse in Bridgeport shouldn't have been on Elena's radar. She was a waitress turned tutor, not someone who tracked Chicago's criminal geography. But when Marco's hands formed the address in trembling signs 3 days after their conversation about connection, Elena's world tilted sideways. That's where Mom died, Marco signed, his small face pale. I've been having dreams again, the loud sounds, the way she fell. And now Dad keeps getting phone calls about Bridgeport, about the warehouse. I think something bad is going to happen there again. Elena's first instinct was to call Dominic immediately. Her second instinct, the one that won, was to understand what Marco was really saying beneath his fear. You're worried your dad is walking into danger, she signed carefully. The same kind of danger that took your mom. Marco nodded, tears tracking down his cheeks. He doesn't tell me things because he thinks I can't handle it, but I hear the security team talking. I see the extra guns. I watch him check the bulletproof vest before he leaves. His hands shook. I'm not stupid or fragile. I'm just quiet. The distinction was crucial. Dominic's protection had become another form of invisibility, shielding Marco from truth until the boy felt erased rather than safe. "What do you want me to do?" Elena asked, though she suspected the answer would complicate everything. "Come with me to talk to him, really talk. Make him see that hiding things from me doesn't protect me, it just makes me more scared." Marco's signs grew fiercer. "I need to know what's happening. I need him to trust me with the truth." Dominic was in his study when they found him, surrounded by men Elena recognized from security detail. Papers covered his desk, blueprints, photographs, documents marked with red circles and angry notes. He looked up at their entrance, his expression shifting from business cold to carefully neutral. "Marco, you should be—" "Don't," Marco signed sharply, cutting through his father's deflection. "Don't tell me I should be doing something else. I need to talk to you, really talk, and you need to listen." The security team exchanged glances. Apparently, Marco's newfound assertiveness was as shocking to them as it was to Dominic. The dangerous man who commanded fear across Chicago's underworld found himself outmaneuvered by an 8-year-old with determined hands. "Give us the room," Dominic ordered quietly. His men filed out, leaving the three of them in heavy silence. Marco didn't wait for permission. His signs poured out with the force of 4 years of suppressed feelings finally breaking free. "I know you're trying to protect me. I know you think if you hide the dangerous parts of your life, I'll be safe from them. But I'm not safe, Dad. I'm terrified. Because I don't know what threats you're facing. I don't know when you leave if you're coming back. And not knowing is worse than any truth could be." Dominic's careful control cracked. He sank into his chair, suddenly looking older than his 38 years. "You're 8 years old. You shouldn't have to know about—" "I'm 8 years old and I watched my mother bleed out on a sidewalk," Marco interrupted, his signs brutal in their honesty. "I already know the worst thing that can happen. You can't protect me from knowledge I've already survived experiencing." Elena watched Dominic absorb this and saw the moment his protective instincts collided with the reality of his son's lived trauma. Sometimes the people we shelter most have already weathered storms we're still trying to shield them from. "There's a situation," Dominic finally admitted, his signs clumsy but sincere. "The warehouse where your mother died. It's connected to a territorial dispute I thought was settled 4 years ago. But new evidence suggests her death wasn't a random crossfire. It was targeted." Marco's hands froze mid-sign. Elena felt her own breath catch. "Someone wanted to send me a message," Dominic continued, his voice flat with controlled rage. "They used your mother to do it. And now they're trying to claim Bridgeport territory using that same warehouse as their base. It's a deliberate provocation." "So you're going to confront them," Marco signed, not a question. "I'm going to end this," Dominic corrected, "permanently, so they can never use that place to hurt our family again." "When?" Marco's hands were steady despite the tears streaming down his face. "Tomorrow night. I have all the pieces in place. After 4 years, I finally have enough evidence and firepower to—" Dominic stopped, seeming to realize he was explaining strategic violence to his child. But Marco wasn't looking away. His signs were clear. "I want to go with you." "Absolutely not," Dominic and Elena said simultaneously. "Not to fight," Marco clarified. "But I need to see that place again. I need to face it so it stops controlling my nightmares. And I need to be there when you face the people who killed Mom. I need to see that justice happens." "Marco, that's too dangerous," Elena signed, though part of her understood his need for closure. "Living in fear is dangerous too," Marco countered with 8-year-old wisdom that hit like a punch. "Dad, you taught me that showing strength means facing what scares you. Let me be strong." The compromise they reached was pure Dominic Rossi, overprotective but pragmatic. Marco could come to Bridgeport, but would remain in an armored vehicle with Elena and a 4-man security detail a full block from the warehouse. He could observe through secured cameras Dominic's team would set up, but would retreat immediately if the situation escalated beyond controlled confrontation. Elena should have refused, should have told Dominic this was inappropriate, dangerous, insane. Instead, she found herself nodding, understanding that sometimes healing required witnessing and closure demanded presence even at a distance. The next evening, Elena picked up Luca from school before heading to the Rossi mansion. Her brother's excited signs when he saw the luxury SUV waiting made her heart ache. He'd been so isolated from experiences like this, from the casual wealth that made adventure possible. "This is Marco," she signed, introducing the boys in the mansion's foyer. "Marco, this is my brother Luca. He's 10 and loves space as much as you do." The boys regarded each other with the cautious assessment of children who'd both learned that being different made connection complicated. Then Luca's hands moved. "Do you know the sign for pulsar? I've been trying to figure it out from videos, but I'm not sure I have it right." Marco's face lit up. His hands flew through an explanation of astronomical signs he'd developed himself, a personal vocabulary born from lonely nights studying stars. Luca responded with his own invented signs, and within minutes they were deep in animated conversation about neutron stars and event horizons, creating shared language around shared passion. Watching them, Elena understood what Marco had been missing. Not just communication, but connection with someone who understood what it meant to navigate a hearing world through silence. Dominic appeared on the stairs, his expression softening at the sight of his son engaged in rapid, joyful signing with another child. "They're already best friends," he observed quietly to Elena. "They're both brilliant and lonely, and finally found someone who speaks their language," Elena replied. "Of course they're friends." "Luca's coming with us tonight," Dominic stated. "If we're letting Marco observe, your brother should too. They can keep each other grounded." Elena started to protest. This was too much, too dangerous, but Luca's excited signs stopped her. "We're going on a mission? A real one? This is the coolest thing that's ever happened to me." Sometimes protective instincts had to bend to allow growth. Elena was learning this lesson alongside Dominic, both of them discovering that the children they wanted to shelter were stronger than their fears allowed. Bridgeport at night was industrial shadows and broken streetlights, the kind of neighborhood where people learned not to notice things that weren't their business. The warehouse loomed against the dark sky, its windows shattered and walls tagged with graffiti that marked territorial claims in a language Elena was only beginning to understand. The armored SUV idled a block away, its tinted windows and reinforced frame creating a mobile fortress. Inside, Marco and Luca sat glued to monitors showing feeds from cameras Dominic's team had positioned around the warehouse perimeter. "There," Marco signed, pointing to a screen showing the sidewalk where his mother had fallen. Even through security footage, Elena could see him trembling. "That's exactly where I was standing, holding her hand, and then the sound started and everything went red." Luca's hand found Marco's, squeezing with the understanding of someone who'd also lost a parent. Their father had died when Luca was 6, leaving Elena to help their mother raise him alone. "Watching doesn't change what happened," Luca signed carefully. "But maybe seeing your dad make it right helps the scared parts of your brain understand it's over." The wisdom in that statement reminded Elena that trauma created its own form of intelligence. These boys had learned lessons most children never had to face. On the monitors, Dominic and his team moved into position with military precision. They wore tactical gear, but no masks. This wasn't a covert operation, but a deliberate show of force. Dominic was making a statement, reclaiming territory that had been used to hurt his family. The confrontation, when it began, was anticlimactic in its efficiency. The men inside the warehouse were outnumbered and outgunned, their bravado crumbling when faced with Dominic's cold fury and overwhelming force. No shots were fired. Instead, Dominic's voice carried through the camera audio, delivering ultimatums in tones that made even Elena shiver. "This warehouse is mine. This territory is mine. And you," his words were precisely chosen, legally careful even in rage, "are leaving Chicago tonight or facing consequences that will make you wish you had." Marco watched his father command the space where his mother had died, reclaiming it through sheer force of will and strategic power. Elena saw the tension drain from the boy's shoulders, saw something shift in his expression. "He's not scared," Marco signed wonderingly. "Even there, where the worst thing happened, he's not scared. He's strong." "He's strong because he's fighting for you," Elena signed back. "That's what love looks like in your father's world. Protection through power." The warehouse cleared within 20 minutes. Dominic's competitors abandoning their claim without the violence Elena had feared. Through it all, Dominic never touched his weapon. His reputation and resources had been enough. When he returned to the SUV, Marco launched himself at his father with the uninhibited emotion of a child finally believing in safety. Dominic caught him, holding tight while the boy's shoulders shook with relieved sobs. "It's over," Dominic signed against Marco's back. "Really over. That place can't hurt us anymore." "Can we burn it down?" Marco asked, his signs fierce. "Can we make it disappear completely?" Dominic's laugh was unexpected, genuine. "I've already arranged for demolition permits. By next month, that warehouse will be rubble. And we're building something better there, a community center, with programs for kids who communicate differently, a place that honors your mother's memory instead of the way she died." The transformation from crime scene to healing space, it was pure Dominic, solving problems through resources while creating legacy from tragedy. 3 months later, Elena stood in what had been the Bridgeport warehouse and was now a construction site, transforming into something extraordinary. The Maria Rossi Center for Deaf and Nonverbal Youth would house classrooms, therapy spaces, recreational facilities, and most importantly, a community where children like Marco and Luca could connect without having to translate themselves for a hearing world. Dominic had thrown himself into the project with the same intensity he'd once reserved for expanding his empire. He'd hired deaf architects, consulted with organizations serving nonverbal children, and most remarkably, had begun dismantling the more violent aspects of his business operations. "I can't undo what I've done," he'd told Elena one evening, his signs now fluid enough to convey nuance. "But I can stop doing it moving forward, for Marco, so he doesn't inherit a legacy built on the kind of violence that took his mother." The transformation wasn't instant or complete. Legitimate business couldn't simply replace decades of criminal infrastructure. But Dominic was methodically restructuring, converting operations where possible, and divesting from those he couldn't clean. His reputation remained dangerous, but his actions were shifting towards something that resembled redemption. Marco had blossomed in ways that still amazed Elena. The isolated, invisible child had become a vibrant advocate for nonverbal communication. He'd started a video blog teaching sign language to hearing kids, his natural charisma and brilliant mind making complex concepts accessible. His subscriber count had hit 50,000, and he received daily messages from children who'd felt invisible until Marco showed them they weren't alone. Luca had become his constant companion and collaborator. The boys were inseparable, finishing each other's signs and developing their own private vocabulary that mixed ASL with invented gestures that made perfect sense to them. They'd formed a club at Luca's school for kids who communicated differently, creating a community where there had been isolation. "Elena!" Marco's signs caught her attention across the construction site. He and Luca raced toward her, hard hats askew and excitement radiating from every movement. "They're installing the planetarium dome today. Come see!" The center's crown jewel, a state-of-the-art planetarium designed specifically with nonverbal children in mind. Shows would be visual-focused with vibration-based sound elements, making astronomy accessible to deaf and hearing kids alike. It was Marco's dream made tangible through his father's resources. As they toured the space, Dominic appeared with Mrs. Chen and the security team, now reduced to discreet presence rather than obvious force. The household staff had all achieved conversational fluency in ASL, transforming the Rossi mansion into a place where Marco's silence was normal and expected rather than accommodated. "There's something I need to discuss with you," Dominic signed to Elena once the boys had raced off to examine the planetarium equipment. "Something important." His serious expression triggered old anxiety. Was he ending their arrangement? Had she overstepped somehow? "I want to establish a formal position," he continued. "Director of Youth Programs for the Maria Rossi Center, salary, benefits, decision-making authority over curriculum and community initiatives." His pale eyes held hers. "I want you to turn this center into what Marco needed 4 years ago, what every nonverbal child in Chicago needs now." Elena's breath caught. "Dominic, I'm not qualified to—" "You're perfectly qualified," he interrupted. "You've transformed my son's life. You've shown me how to actually communicate with him. You've built bridges between our worlds that I didn't know were possible. If you can do that for one child, imagine what you could do for hundreds." "I haven't finished my degree," Elena pointed out, though her heart was already saying yes. "Then finish it. We'll arrange your schedule around your classes, hire assistants to handle what you can't." He pulled out a formal offer letter, the salary listed making her eyes water. "This isn't charity or obligation, it's recognizing your value and giving you resources to do what you're already brilliant at." Before Elena could respond, Marco and Luca returned, their signs urgent. "Dad, Elena, you have to come see this. They found something during excavation." The construction foreman led them to a corner of the site where workers had uncovered something during foundation digging, a time capsule buried decades ago by neighborhood children. Inside were drawings, notes, small treasures, a snapshot of Bridgeport's past before violence and neglect had hollowed it out. "Can we make a new one?" Marco signed excitedly. "For kids to find in 50 years? To show them what we built here?" The symbolism wasn't lost on anyone. Transforming a place of death into one of hope, bearing promises for the future where tragedy had once bloomed. "That's perfect," Dominic agreed, his scarred hands gentle as he examined a child's drawing from 1975. "We'll create a time capsule for the center's opening. Every kid who comes through our programs can contribute something." As Marco and Luca enthusiastically planned what to include, Elena caught Dominic's eye. He signed privately, meant only for her. "Thank you for seeing him, for seeing me, for not running away when you understood what my world really was." "Thank you for letting me in," Elena signed back, "for trusting me with your son, for changing." "I'm not sure I've changed," Dominic admitted. "More like, remembered there are things worth protecting beyond power and territory." Marco reminded me. "You showed me how." The Maria Rossi Center opened 6 months later to community celebration that transformed Bridgeport for an entire weekend. Food trucks lined the streets, local artists donated murals, and hundreds of families with nonverbal children gathered to explore spaces designed specifically for their needs. Marco and Luca served as tour guides, their enthusiasm infectious as they demonstrated the center's features. The planetarium's first show brought tears to parents' eyes as their deaf children experienced stars through vibration and light, accessing wonder that had always been available but never made accessible. Dominic moved through the celebration with quiet pride, his reputation preceding him, but softened by the obvious good this center would accomplish. Former rivals attended, their children benefiting from programs that transcended territorial disputes. Even some of Dominic's old enemies sent donations, grudging respect for his transformation evident in their gestures. Elena's mother attended, wheelchair-bound but radiant as she watched her daughter command the space with natural authority. Luca's school sent representatives, already discussing partnership programs. Local politicians gave speeches about community investment. carefully not mentioning the center's founder's complicated past. As evening fell and the celebration transitioned to a more intimate gathering, Dominic found Elena on the roof garden overlooking the Chicago skyline. The city sparkled beneath them, Lake Michigan a dark presence beyond the lights. "Do you remember the first night at Marcello's?" he asked, signing and speaking simultaneously. "When you knelt beside Marco and signed hello, I thought you were either incredibly brave or incredibly foolish." "Both, probably," Elena admitted with a smile. "I didn't understand what I was walking into." "And now that you do understand?" Dominic's expression was unreadable. "Do you regret it?" Elena considered the question honestly. The past 9 months had been complicated, dangerous, transformative. She'd waded into a world of violence and power, had witnessed things that couldn't be unseen, had made compromises with her conscience she was still processing. But she'd also watched an invisible child become visible, had built bridges between silence and sound, had helped a dangerous man remember how to be a father first and a crime lord second. "No regrets," she signed firmly. "Some concerns, definitely some questions about what happens next, but no regrets." "Good," Dominic replied, "because I have a question for you." He pulled out a small box, opening it to reveal not a ring, but a key on an elegant chain. "This is the master key to the center," he explained. "It's yours, not just as an employee, but as a partner in this mission. Marco's mission, your brother's mission. Every child who's ever felt invisible because they communicate differently." His pale eyes held vulnerability she'd rarely seen. "I can fund this place, but you make it matter. You give it heart. Will you accept that responsibility?" Elena took the key, its weight both literal and metaphorical. "Yes," she signed, "on one condition." "Name it." "Marco gets a key, too. Not to be symbolic, but because this is his legacy as much as his mother's. He should have real input into how it develops, not just as your son, but as someone who understands what these kids need." Dominic's smile was genuine, reaching his eyes for perhaps the first time since she'd met him. "Done. I'll have another made tomorrow." He paused. "You know, when Maria died, I thought the best I could do was protect Marco from the world that killed her, build walls high enough to keep danger out." "And instead?" Elena prompted. "Instead, you taught me that protection isn't about walls. It's about giving people tools to navigate the world on their own terms. Marco doesn't need me to shelter him from every difficulty. He needs me to ensure he's never invisible again." Below them, Marco and Luca's laughter drifted up from the planetarium where they were showing the evening stars to a group of younger children. Their hands flew through signs, painting pictures of constellations and cosmic wonder for kids who'd been told they were too different to understand such things. "They're going to change the world," Elena observed. "They already have," Dominic corrected. "They changed mine." The Maria Rossi Center had become a model for inclusive youth programming, attracting visitors from around the country studying how to create spaces where nonverbal communication was centered rather than accommodated. Elena's formal title was Director of Youth Development, but her real role was building the kind of community she'd wished existed when Luca was young. Marco, now 10, had published his first children's book about a boy who found strength in silence and taught the world to listen with their eyes instead of their ears. Luca illustrated it, their collaboration a testament to friendship that transcended typical bonds. Dominic had completed his transition to legitimate business, his empire now focused on real estate development, accessibility consulting, and surprisingly, publishing. His reputation remained formidable. People didn't forget his past, but his present actions spoke louder than old stories. The biggest surprise came when Marco's voice returned. Not gradually, but suddenly one morning at breakfast, when he looked at his father and said aloud, "I love you, Dad." The household froze. Dominic's coffee cup paused midway to his lips. Mrs. Chen dropped a spoon with a clatter that seemed deafening in the shocked silence. Marco smiled, then signed. I can talk now. I'm choosing to. But I'll never stop signing. It's still my first language. The one that saved me when words were too dangerous. His voice was rusty from disuse but clear. His words deliberate and precious because they were chosen rather than reflexive. Why now? Dominic asked, his own voice rough with emotion. Because I'm not scared anymore, Marco explained, alternating between signs and speech. Words took something from me when I was 4, but words also gave me Elena and Luca and the center. I'm ready to use both languages now, on my terms. Elena understood the profound healing this represented, not choosing between silence and speech, but claiming both as authentic expressions of self. The center continued to grow, its model replicated in 3 other cities. Marco and Luca remained its heart, though, their friendship and advocacy inspiring children across the country. They'd started a YouTube channel that had millions of subscribers, their easy banter and brilliant minds making sign language cool to a generation raised on digital communication. One evening, as Elena prepared to lock up the center after a particularly successful day, Dominic appeared with Marco and Luca in tow. We have something for you, Marco signed and spoke simultaneously, his dual fluency now effortless. He handed Elena an envelope embossed with official letterhead. Inside was a partnership agreement, making Elena part owner of the Maria Rossi Center, with equal say in its direction and expansion. You've given my son everything I couldn't, Dominic signed, his fluency now matching his speech. His voice, his confidence, his community. This center is as much yours as it is ours. Time to make that official. I don't know what to say, Elena admitted, tears blurring her vision. Say yes, Luca signed cheekily, because Marco and I already planned our next project, and we need your help making it happen. The boys pulled out drawings of their vision, a summer camp for deaf and nonverbal kids, located on land Dominic had apparently already purchased in Wisconsin. A place where silence would be normal and sign language would be the default, where children who'd felt invisible could finally just be kids. Looking at their excited faces, at the community they'd built from one simple act of recognition in a restaurant 2 years ago, Elena understood that some moments changed everything. Some connections transcended circumstances. Some families were chosen through shared purpose rather than blood. Yes, she signed and said aloud. Always yes. Let's build something amazing together. And they did. If this story moved you, please hit the like button and share it with someone who needs to hear this message. Every share helps me create more powerful stories like this. Thank you for being here. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If you loved this story, check out the other videos on your screen now. I think you'll really enjoy them. And don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. See you in the next story.